Let's see here, where's the... Right, that's it then. Love the car. Not much to report, really. Been a very simple project, really, overall. Light mechanical work and just a general, some neglected maintenance issues and a really nice car to drive. Let's have a quick lookie. We've looked at the car plenty of times, but I think really overall we have to say this is probably one of the nicest cars that American Motors did of the era. Everybody remembers the muscle cars and the AMX and the Javelin, but the amount of detail just in getting the front of this car put together the way they did, very nice. A certain amount of vision and thought went into that with the number of different pieces stacked and painted and fitted to give the look of the grille floating inside there. Really exceptional. I think we mentioned earlier that head designer Richard Teague was fond of interchangeable pieces to cut cost, and so I bet you would find that those headlight buckets are interchangeable. AMC had a reputation for being able to make a lot from from what they had. So, but this was a good looking car. You know, sounds good, it looks good, it's got great 1960s feel, 1960s colors, the upholstery in the interior, obviously, you know, 1960s, pretty much, right? I would have wanted to shoot this last scene from out on the road while we were driving it, but the snow has come and I've missed my chance, and the car is put away for winter now, and that's also just fine. You don't see a lot of these ambassadors, and I think this is a car that is, when you look at it now, certainly the equal of the Fords and Chevs, and probably some of the more expensive models of the era. There's not a lot of Chrysler cars, and I have a lot of them, that were finished this well inside, and the styling is really a treat, especially on the interior. The outside has got a very typical late 60s Coke bottle shape that, of course, everybody was, I think any car built after 1965 in the United States owes a certain amount to the General Motors, and particularly Pontiac, I think, in these years. This car included, a lot of models came before this, did not look this good, and most of the ones that came after did not. I think really, for my money, 1967, if you're going to buy a 1960s, if you're going to buy any Ambassador, really, you could do a lot worse than 1967. It's an exceptional car in detail and overall presentation. It's a car that doesn't give you any sense of awkward, you know, you don't feel like you're being kind of put on like you do with a lot of cars in the 70s. I think a lot of the cars, as the 70s went on, just started to have this real, you know, they had a feel of just phoniness, and I don't think that you know, this car has fake wood grain trim and whatnot, but there's not acres of it, and it's not being, you know, it's not shoved in your face. I think the car, to me, manages to be chromy and flashy and yet restrained and tasteful, and perfectly representative of a high watermark for the company. Yeah, I don't know if the 67 Ambassador made money for American Motors, but I think it should have if it didn't, and I suspect that it actually did, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of great cars did not make any money, and in the end, American Motors couldn't make it. It's too bad. They had the talent, but when you consider the scale of the operations of American car companies in the 1950s and 60s, like taking on General Motors was like taking on a whole other country. The scale and the scope and the size of those the engineering and production departments in those companies was just, it was massive. It was unbeatable. And so sadly, all the independents throughout the 50s eventually folded together, in this case to become American Motors, which you know, I think really represented the spirit of those independent companies well into the 80s, well, certainly into the 70s. They, you know, there was a time, I think, when there was a market for a car that was just a little more carefully thought out, and maybe a little, you know, maybe a little different, but if there were shortcomings in the cars, they were compensated for in other ways, like in quality of trim and fittings. So you see that with Nash and Hudson, who joined to become AMC. Their cars were they cost more than Chevs and Fords, but I think for the money you got a nicely appointed and fitted and carefully thought out car. And I think that carried on throughout the 60s with these cars. I love the design of it more than any aspect of its performance or whatever. I've never really been into that. It does have the best, as far as I know, it has all the best trimmings available in this car, and I think as somebody who has a 67 Plymouth and have driven 60s Fords and Plymouths and Dodges and Chevs, I've driven them all, and you know, this car is the equal of all of them in virtually every respect, and superior in a lot. I would say the design on the interior, as much as I love my Chrysler cars, this is a nicer looking piece inside. AMC cars, not always the first to come to mind when you think about beautiful cars of the 1960s, but I think in this case, at least, we could say that this is a possibly one that got missed when you think about how many gorgeous cars were done in that era. It's easy to overlook, I think, one of the nicer jobs that came out of that era. Certainly AMC would go on to do distinctive cars, and Richard Teague, of course, himself would be you know, infamous or famous for the Pacer, which I personally think is a pretty interesting car, and again, really only let down by the same problem that AMC had so often, which was financing and execution being not really up to the original design intent. Whereas here we have, if only because it is such a conventional car, a superb execution of the 1960s two-door. If this is your kind of car, this is a beautiful job of it. And this particular example being so clean and low miles, a real treat to own. And I think if I have to let it go, it'll go to somebody who also would appreciate it, you know, for the same reasons. Is a nice looking interpretation of the theme, and a little different from the ordinary. So I hope you guys liked having a look at this car over the last year. We didn't do a ton of work on it, but we had to do a little, and pretty basic stuff, and saved a really interesting and probably pretty rare car. I think the next car, of course, will be different again, and a little more complicated than this. So I look forward to getting at it and showing everybody. And I guess that's about it. I am sitting in here with a camera pointed at myself, and it's weird because I don't really talk to it. So I hope you enjoyed having a look at and having a listen to it and seeing it going, because that was the idea. All right, we're out of here. We'll do another one right away here. Cheers.
From back here, it looks like he's riding with some chick with some really wicked hairdo.
It's a regular
same old shit.